My name's Mike, and I'm 26 now. I've been holding on to this story for years, and honestly, I'm not sure why I never told anyone before. Maybe I thought it was too much or just didn't have the courage, but sometimes you reach a point where you just need to get it out, even if it's somewhere like this. So here I am, ready to tell it. This all started 7 years ago, when I was 19 and still living with my mom. We were always very close. She was a single mom, and it had always been just the two of us. But everything changed when she met a guy named Jack. They hit it off really fast, and before I knew it, they were inseparable. Within less than 4 months, they were married. I guess that's how it goes when you're older and know what you want. You don't waste time. I wanted to be happy for her, really. And for the most part, I was. She looked so alive, and I hadn't seen her smile like that in years, but little did I know things were about to change in ways I never saw coming. Jack officially became my stepdad, and at first, it felt strange to have a new man around. I tried to go with the flow, though. Jack was friendly and seemed like a good guy, so I figured if he made my mom happy, that was enough for me. But soon, I would find out that my feelings toward him were a lot more complicated than I realized. You could say Jack had a presence that drew people in. He was in his mid-30s, around 35, and though he was a few years younger than my mom, they made a good pair. He had this confidence about him, like he knew exactly who he was and what he wanted. Jack wasn't just good-looking. He was magnetic, muscular, fit. He clearly took care of himself. Anyone passing him on the street would probably do a double take. And as much as I tried to deny it to myself, I couldn't ignore the fact that I was also attracted to him, but in a way that was both confusing and intense. I knew I was gay, had known since I was about 16, but I'd kept it to myself, especially around family. Suddenly, though, there was this new presence in my life, someone I couldn't stop thinking about. At first, I thought it was just admiration, like, wow, my mom married someone cool. But it was more than that. Every time he was around, I'd catch myself looking at him a little longer than I should, noticing details I knew were better left unnoticed. There was a pull that I couldn't fully explain, something beyond the physical that made me feel things I knew I shouldn't. I wasn't proud of it, but I couldn't deny it either. There was something about him that just got to me, but I didn't want to mess things up for my mom. She had finally found happiness, and I wasn't about to ruin that. So I kept my feelings buried, acting normal around him, trying to ignore the butterflies that would pop up every time he was near. I kept reminding myself that he was my mom's husband, my stepdad, and that crossing any lines was completely out of the question. Still, the heart wants what it wants, right? And mine was leading me down a path that would change everything. After Jack married my mom, I started to notice that my routine at home had completely changed. Before, our home was quiet, and I could count on having a space just for myself. But now, Jack was around all the time. It wasn't necessarily bad, just different. He was the kind of guy who liked to stay active, always fixing something around the house or heading out for a run. He worked out constantly, and it was easy to see the results in his physique. I tried to avoid it, but I often found myself looking at him when he came back from the gym, his shirt clinging to his sweaty body, muscles on display. These new dynamics created a tension I didn't know how to handle. I tried to focus on my studies and my daily activities, but sometimes his presence was an impossible distraction. We'd find ourselves in situations where he wasn't just a good-looking guy. He was someone I shared a space with. Sometimes I'd wonder if he noticed my glances. I'd imagine what he might think, but I'd always end up looking away before he could catch me staring. There was something about Jack that drew me in beyond just looks. He was polite, patient with my mom and with me, and always went out of his way to be kind. I found that admirable, even inspiring. He seemed to be a model of what a man should be, but at the same time, that admiration stirred something inside me that felt like a conflict. I knew I wasn't supposed to feel this way about him. He was my stepdad, after all. But every day, I felt more and more bound by this silent attraction. One day, when my mom was busy at work, I came home from college earlier than usual and found Jack alone at the house. He was in the kitchen, making himself a snack, and he invited me to join him. We sat down and talked for a long time, covering everything from sports to hobbies to music. I felt like he genuinely wanted to get to know me, and that made me feel more comfortable around him. But at the same time, every smile and laugh we shared made my heart race. When he laughed at one of my jokes, I noticed the sparkle in his eyes and the way he looked at me, like he was really paying attention. It threw me off, and I realized I was growing attached to him in a way I shouldn't be. I made an excuse to leave shortly afterward, trying to put some distance between us. But when I got back to my room, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Every moment we spent together seemed etched into my memory, each one stirring a whirlwind of emotions within me. From that day on, I found myself imagining situations where we'd be alone. It wasn't something I did on purpose. It was like my mind was playing tricks on me. I knew these thoughts were wrong, but I also knew that they only grew stronger as time passed. Jack seemed oblivious to what I felt, but to me, he was becoming the center of my thoughts, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep it hidden. As days went by, I started noticing that my relationship with Jack was becoming more comfortable, even if a bit confusing for me at times. Sometimes he'd offer me a ride to college, and I'd take the chance to chat with him about all kinds of things: my studies, music, sports, even plans for the future. Jack was always easygoing, and he genuinely seemed to enjoy our conversations, giving me advice and sharing stories from his own life. It was great having someone like that around, someone who felt like a friend as much as a family member. One afternoon, I was studying in the living room when Jack came back from a run. He was clearly in a good mood, still energized as he greeted me. He grabbed a bottle of water and sat down nearby to cool off. We ended up chatting for a bit, talking about fitness routines and ways to stay healthy. It was a normal conversation, but I found myself looking up to him more and more, seeing him as a role model. Jack made staying active look easy, and he always encouraged me to take care of myself too. Our conversations started to feel like a regular part of my day, and I found myself looking forward to them. Jack was great at listening and seemed genuinely interested in my life and thoughts. I couldn't help but admire him. He had this way of making me feel comfortable and valued, and it meant a lot to have someone like that in my corner. Even when we'd just talk about something as simple as my college classes, he had a way of making the conversation feel important. A few days later, my mom had to work late, so Jack and I ordered some takeout and watched a game together. I realized how easy it was to just relax and enjoy the evening with him, like hanging out with a close friend. He was cheering for his team, and I found myself getting into the spirit too. By the end of the game, we were laughing and sharing stories, and I felt like we were really bonding. It was nice to have someone like him in my life, someone who felt supportive in such a natural way. After the game, Jack headed upstairs, and I stayed behind in the living room, reflecting on how much things had changed since he'd come into our lives. I hadn't expected to get along with my mom's husband so well, and I definitely hadn't expected him to become such an important part of my daily routine. But here we were, and I was grateful for it. Having him around brought a new, positive energy into the house, and I could see how happy he made my mom, too. Over time, I realized that my admiration for Jack was something I valued deeply. It felt good to have someone to look up to, someone who felt like more than just family. As the days went by, I felt more grounded and inspired to focus on my own path, motivated by the positive influence he had on me. And with that realization, I knew that whatever this feeling was, it had a place in my life, even if it was just something I kept to myself. Over time, my routine with Jack became more complicated. Every interaction felt more intense, more loaded with emotions I could barely contain. I knew it was only a matter of time before something slipped out of my control, but I was still trying to hold back. What made it even harder was the kindness and attention he showed me. He seemed genuinely interested in my life and the things I did. In any other situation, it would have just been friendship, but for me, it was like throwing gasoline on a fire I was trying desperately to put out. One evening, my mom had to work late, and Jack and I were left alone at home. He suggested we watch a movie together, and I agreed, trying not to show how nervous that idea made me. We sat side by side on the couch, and he soon put his arm around the back of the sofa, enveloping me in a way that felt casual but also incredibly intimate. As the movie went on, I felt the tension in the air, and it was impossible to focus on anything other than his presence beside me. At one point, Jack made a comment about a scene in the movie and turned to me. Our eyes met, and for a second, I felt like he was about to say something important. But he just smiled, and I looked away, trying to hide the blush spreading across my face. Every time this happened, I wondered if he knew what I was feeling, if he could sense the intensity of my emotions, and the idea that he might know only heightened my anxiety. After the movie ended, Jack went to the kitchen to grab something, and I sat there trying to calm my thoughts. It was impossible to ignore the impact he had on me. Every time we were together, it felt like the world around us disappeared, leaving just the two of us. I knew it was wrong, but at the same time, it was a feeling I had never experienced before. And in moments like that, I felt like I'd risk everything just to be close to him. When he came back, he asked if I needed anything before we went to bed. I just shook my head, trying to keep my composure. He gave me one last smile before heading upstairs, and I watched as he disappeared down the hallway. I felt a hollowness in my chest, a longing to follow him, to make it clear how I felt, but I held back. I knew I needed to stay in control, even though it was becoming harder by the day. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind was filled with thoughts of him. I replayed every detail of the night, every look, every smile, every second we'd spent close together. As much as I tried to fight these feelings, it was like they had taken on a life of their own. I lay awake for hours wondering what I would do next, how I would deal with this attraction that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. I knew that eventually I would have to face the truth about what I really wanted. One afternoon, I came home earlier than usual and found Jack in the kitchen making himself a snack. He waved me over and asked if I'd like to join him. We ended up chatting as we ate, talking about everything from my recent classes to his favorite recipes. I hadn't expected to have such an easy, relaxed conversation, but I found myself genuinely enjoying his company. Jack had this way of making even the simplest moments feel enjoyable, and it was nice to unwind after a busy day. As we talked, he offered me some advice about school and shared stories about his own college days. I could see that he genuinely cared, and it felt great to have someone show that kind of interest in my life. There was a sense of support and friendship in our interaction, and I realized that I was starting to see him as more than just my mom's husband. Spending time with him made me feel motivated and understood, like I had someone in my corner. After we finished, Jack thanked me for the company and patted me on the back before heading upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen for a moment, thinking about how much things had changed. Having Jack around had brought a new energy to our home, and I could see how happy he made my mom. It was comforting to know that he cared about me, too, and I felt lucky to have him in my life as a friend and role model. The tension between Jack and me kept growing, and I knew that at any moment I might cross the line. One afternoon, when we were alone, he suggested that we work out together since I had mentioned wanting to improve my fitness routine. I didn't know if it was a good idea, but the chance to spend time with him was irresistible, so I agreed. He guided me through the workout, correcting my form and demonstrating exercises, which only made our closeness more intense. During the exercises, he would occasionally place his hand on my shoulder or waist to adjust my posture. Each touch was like an electric shock, and I had to work hard not to show how much it affected me. He seemed so relaxed, completely absorbed in his role as a trainer, while I was struggling to stay focused and not let my feelings show. But those small interactions were pushing me to my limit. At the end of the workout, we were exhausted and sat side by side on the floor to catch our breath. Jack was breathing heavily, his face flushed, which only made him more attractive in my eyes. He looked at me with a smile and gave me a pat on the shoulder, praising my effort. I smiled back, but inside, my heart was racing, and I knew I was at a point where I could no longer pretend that this was just simple admiration. As we talked, he mentioned how nice it was to have someone to work out with and that he felt more motivated when I was around. His words echoed in my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder if he felt something beyond friendship or if he was just being friendly. I sat there in silence for a few seconds, lost in thought, until he pulled me back to reality with a question about my future plans. Still, that moment had already marked something inside me. After the workout, he offered me a glass of water, and we spent a few more minutes together. I tried to hide my nerves, but it was as if every gesture he made drew me closer, like there was an invisible connection pulling us together. I no longer knew how to act normally, and the only thing keeping me in line was the fear that my mom might notice something. Even so, at that moment, all I wanted was for him to know how I felt. That night, as I tried to sleep, I replayed every touch, every smile, every word he'd said, It felt like I was losing control, like I was being swept away by a current of feelings that only grew stronger. I didn't know how this would end, but one thing was certain. I could no longer hide what I felt, and if something didn't change soon, there would be no going back. A few days after our workout, my mom had to go on a business trip and would be away for 2 days. That meant Jack and I would be alone at home, and just the thought made me restless. The prospect of being alone with him without my mom around created an anticipation I couldn't ignore. I tried to act normal, but deep down, I knew this could be the opportunity I had secretly been hoping for. At the same time, I felt a growing guilt for even thinking that way. On the first night, we decided to order pizza and watch a movie together. I was nervous, but I tried to appear relaxed. We sat side by side on the couch, and as the movie progressed, I noticed he was sitting closer to me. At one point, our legs touched, and he didn't pull away. It was a simple touch, but for me, it carried enormous tension. I tried to focus on the movie, but my mind was racing, imagining what could happen. During a particularly funny scene, he laughed and placed his hand on my shoulder, as if it were a casual gesture. But to me, that contact meant so much more. Every passing second made the atmosphere more intense, and I no longer knew if I could hold back my feelings much longer. I wondered if he sensed how nervous I was, or if it was all just my imagination. I was caught between the desire and fear that something might actually happen. After the movie ended, we continued talking, and the conversation drifted toward relationships. He asked if there was someone I had my eye on, and for a moment, I fell silent, unsure of what to say. It was hard to lie in that moment, but I couldn't just reveal what I was feeling either. I just smiled and deflected, saying I didn't have time for that right now. He laughed, but gave me a look that seemed to understand more than I wanted him to know. When we decided to go to bed, he got up, patted my back, and wished me a good night. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to process everything that had happened that evening. I felt a mixture of relief and disappointment, as if I had been hoping for something more to happen. But at the same time, I knew it was probably better that things had ended that way, without crossing any lines. Still, as I went to my room, my mind kept returning to him. Lying in bed, I replayed everything that had happened. The touch of our legs, his hand on my shoulder, the looks we exchanged. It was hard to believe he hadn't noticed anything. I felt as if we were playing a silent game where neither of us wanted to be the first to make a move. And at that moment, I decided that if there was another chance, I'd need the courage to finally find out if he felt the same or if it was all in my head. The next morning, I woke up feeling a sense of clarity. I knew that keeping my feelings bottled up wasn't helping, so I decided to have an honest conversation with Jack. Later that day, when we had a quiet moment, I told him about the admiration I felt and how grateful I was for his presence in my life. He listened thoughtfully and reassured me that he valued our friendship just as much. His understanding response made me feel at ease, and I knew that I could move forward without any confusion between us. Over the next few weeks, things settled into a comfortable rhythm. Jack and I continued to get along well, and I felt like a weight had been lifted. My respect for him grew, and I knew I could focus on my own goals without any lingering doubts. Looking back now, I see that this experience helped me understand myself better and strengthened our family bond. I'm grateful for the journey and ready for what comes next.